The city of Rome is famous for many reasons, mostly historical. Over the many years of its existence, Rome has birthed many a man, many a myth, and many a legend, but none quite as manly, mythical, or legendary as the subject of today's video, an orator capable of packing Madison Square Garden through his quick-witted, auctioneer-esque delivery, a man who would become a needle mover in wrestling and a local hero of popular culture. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Lou Albano. Lou Albano was an Italian-American. His parents had Italian ancestry, but had been born in the States, and Lou himself was born in the beautiful city of Rome. His mother was a classical concert pianist, and his father was an obstetrician, which is a birth doctor for those who can't be bothered typing that into Google. Lou was baptized in the Vatican, which is pretty based. Him and his parents would return to New York City shortly after this. The family had been mired with tragedy, as Lou was one of 9 children, only 5 of whom would live until adulthood. The family would settle in the Mount Vernon area in Westchester County, New York, which is an inner-city suburb north of the Bronx, for anyone familiar with New York geography. He would attend Archbishop Stepinac High School in White Plains, and would take part in multiple extracurricular athletics, including competing in track and field. He would also dip his hands in the muddy waters of football, and in drawing them found it better to be a commander than a common man. He became captain of his high school football team, a role that would later inspire his wrestling moniker. He must have been bloody good, as when his high school years were drawing to a close, he was offered full scholarships from 32 different universities around the country. Choosing the University of Tennessee for the strength of their football team, he would play alongside Darius McCord, Doug Atkins, and Sam Rutigliano, who was also Lou's roommate. They say you're a product of the people you spend most of your time with, and like his teammates, Lou was earmarked for success. However, being a high-testosterone, red-blooded Italian-American, he would often run afoul of the dean due to his poor behavior, the final nail in the coffin being Albano's attempt to cheat on a final exam, leading to his expulsion from college. Albano would then join the United States military, where he would catch his first glimpse of the sport he would make a career in. A professional wrestling event would be held at Fort Dix whilst Lou was there. He would see Gorgeous George, Arnold Scarland, Soldier Barry, and Lenny Montana, all future colleagues of Captain Lou Albano, though he wasn't to know it yet as a young military man. Fate, however, had a plan for Lou, and after 8 months, he would be honorably discharged from the military due to injury. Albano's father had plans to open an insurance agency with his son. However, Lou was set on training to become a boxer. Whilst working as a bouncer, Lou Albano would be introduced to Willie Gilzenberg, who would suggest that due to Lou's short stature, he would be better suited to professional wrestling. The signs had of course been there for Lou, his father having also been an amateur wrestler at some point, and the show he'd seen whilst in the military meant that he was familiar with the craft. Gilzenberg would enlist Soldier Barry to help train Albano, and in 1952, Lou Albano would break into the business by doing house shows in New York. Lou Albano would begin his career wrestling as a babyface or good guy for you normies out there, his youthful looks leading to him being seen as a pretty boy. But when a non-wrestling injury would cause a gash on his forehead, Lou would purposely not allow it to heal on the grounds that it was totally badass. I can relate to this. There's a scar on my bicep that I literally didn't let heal because of how cool it looks. Yes, I am that weird in real life. Anyway, Lou's new scar would change his pretty boy perception in the eyes of the audience to a more rugged and rough look, which allowed him to turn heel and become billed as the Mount Vernon Mauler. Occasionally, he would play the role of a pirate during this time. This guy is officially my hero. As Noel Gallagher once famously said, there's nothing cooler than a pirate. He was developing more of a name for himself in the New York professional wrestling community, which itself during this era was beginning to thrive with the advent of the Capital Wrestling Corporation, which was the first iteration of what we now know as the WWE. If you want a better idea of what the New York wrestling scene had been like leading up to this point, you should probably check out this vid I made on Jess McMahon, Vince's granddad. Of course, the CWC was being run by Vince Sr. at the time, and it was under the McMahons that Albano would wrestle for most of his career. As a singles wrestler, he wasn't particularly remarkable. But as a tag team wrestler, it was a different story. He would shine as a member of a team dubbed the Sicilians alongside Tony Altamira. You can probably guess, if you didn't already know, that it was a stereotypical mafia gimmick that the team ran with, borrowing heavily from the popular television series The Untouchables. They would win the Midwest Tag Team Championships on the undercard of an event at Comiskey Park on June 30th, 1961, defeating Billy Getz and Johnny Gilbert. Sharing the card with big names of the time such as Bob Orton Sr., Haystacks Calhoun, and Buddy Rogers, who defeated Pat O'Connor in the main event for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. It was a pretty stacked card, and thus drew the largest gate in the United States to that point. Of course, playing mobster can be fun, but is a dangerous game, as you may find yourself winding up the real mafia, and unfortunately, in 1961, they caught the attention of Tony Accardo of the Chicago outfit. You know, the Chicago outfit that had been run by Al Capone. Big Tuna Tony would, alongside two associates, politely request that the wrestlers cease their use of the word mafia. During this run, the team would also have personal differences with bookers and other wrestlers, which led to them leaving Chicago without dropping the Midwest tag belts. To be honest, I'd have left the territory because of the disagreements with the Chuffin Mafia rather than some bookers. But then again, I'm not Captain Lou. The mid-60s were a quiet time for Lou, as he made some appearances in '64 for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation as a singles competitor. This was an interesting time to be a part of the Fed, as it had followed their inaugurating of their first WWF champion in Buddy Rogers and their first split and clash with the NWA, which is a story that would span decades. The Sicilians would reform in the Fed in 1967 and win the United States tag titles from Arnold Scarland and Spiros Arion in July of that year. They would hold the titles for a grand total of 2 weeks, and their reign wouldn't even be acknowledged much by the Fed. However, plenty of photographs of the pair with the titles would circulate around wrestling magazines and would elevate the reputation of both men, which would serve Lou well later in his career. By 1969, the pair had disbanded, and Lou would continue as a singles competitor before making the change circa 1970 to becoming a manager, which is the role the captain would truly shine in. Bruno Sammartino was an integral part of this shift for Lou Albano, remarking to McMahon Sr. that whilst Albano is a mediocre wrestler, he's a hell of a talker. Bruno suggested that Albano would be better utilized as a manager, and given that the man could talk his way out of a straitjacket and had the pace of Slim Shady before the Sugar Hill Gang had so much as breathed on a microphone, it's fair to see why Bruno thought this. Albano at the time was also realizing both that his ability as a wrestler was limited, and that eventually, these injuries, including the old football injuries that had contributed to his military discharge, would catch up to him. This was the catalyst that put the final nail in the coffin of the Sicilian tag team. However, the boys remained close until Altamira passed away in 2003. This is where Lou's career really changed for the better. He was first the manager for Oscar Crusher Verdu, who had recently emigrated from Spain. Oscar was great in the ring but could barely speak English. Albano was the perfect mouthpiece for such a talent and would use his gift of the gab to emphasize Verdu's impressive physique and would tell audiences that Oscar had never been taken off his feet during a match. He would also rile up audiences using ethnic slurs which were far more commonplace at the time, promising that Oscar Verdu was going to, quote, stomp on that Italian in reference to Bruno Sammartino, despite Albano being Italian himself. Bruno would go on to say, "They wanted to see me beat the hell out of Verdu to make Albano a liar. He could get the kind of heat that nobody else could," is what Bruno Sammartino would say in reference to this time. This gift of the gab would lead to a sellout in Madison Square Garden for Oscar's confrontation with Bruno, as well as a record gate which would then be broken by a rematch between Oscar and Bruno a month later. That's pretty mind-blowing, to break a record gate and sell out like that, and then to break it again a month later. It was proven that Lou could talk, and whilst Oscar Verdu quickly faded into obscurity, Lou Albano remained the top heel manager for 15 years, adopting the moniker of Captain Lou Albano. Speaking of his promo ability at the time, Lou would say, "I just remember the point I want to bring across, and then I just babble before, during, and after. Somehow in the middle, I said the 2 or 3 sentences that sold tickets. Mostly, I just tried to make people want to see me get my ass kicked, and along the way, hopefully, the guy I was managing would catch a beating too." He would grow out his hair and beard and get a little tubbier to give a more rough and wild image, and was inspired by a homeless man to apply rubber bands to his beard, which would become an iconic part of his image. During his time as a manager, he would manage greats such as Ivan Koloff, who famously ended Sammartino's 7-year reign as champion. This drew so much heat that initially the crowd fell silent before beginning to riot. This is old-school heat you don't see anymore. Albano, his wife, and a family friend were all in attendance, and as they escaped to a taxi outside Madison Square Garden, they were chased by an angry mob of fans who surrounded the cab and began breaking windows. So they ditched the cab and hightailed it to a nearby bar while being pelted with mud and objects. The mob decided to destroy the bar as the police finally arrived, and the whole ordeal led to Vince McMahon Sr. receiving a bill for damages that was around 27 grand. In today's money, that's about $182,000, which is insane. Thank God they were drawing such big houses at the time, as the profits would outweigh the costs that came with the heat. Lou Albano would also manage Iron Mike McCord, Don Muraco, Greg Valentine, as well as managing 13 different teams who he would guide to tag team gold, including the Valiant Brothers, the Yukon Lumberjacks, the Blackjacks, the Mongols, the Masked Executioners, and the Wild Samoans. Yes, even back then, the WWE had Samoans being managed by an unkempt, overweight heel manager with the gift of gab. Some things never change, do they? By the end of his career, Albano had managed over 50 different wrestlers who had won 24 championships, making him one of the most decorated managers of all time. He was also, though in hindsight this may not have been the best, responsible for the boom period of Jimmy Superfly Snuka's career. He had managed Jimmy Snuka as a heel. However, Jimmy was becoming a fan favorite due to his high-flying style, which was very new at the time to the New York audience and the greater wrestling audience in general. When Albano turned his back on Snuka, and alongside Freddie Blassie and Ray Stevens, beat the tar out of Snuka, Jimmy went on to become a sympathetic babyface, and would enjoy the most successful period of his career. I should include a disclaimer here for anyone who doesn't know the story regarding Jimmy Snuka, but the guy was a scumbag, and it's one for you to look into yourself. Let's not waste too much time talking about him. In 1979, Lou Albano began forging a relationship between the world of rock music and the world of wrestling that would lead to what many consider to be wrestling's golden age through the rock and wrestling connection. He was introduced to the band NRBQ on their tour bus by Jimmy Valiant, and Terry Adams invited Albano to play the part of their manager. Albano would tape a TV commercial for the band's album Tiddlywinks in 1980, and that advert was considered so bloody offensive it was broadcast only once in Boston. He was just a natural heat magnet in any realm of entertainment. He would feature on their 1981 track Captain Lou, ranting and raving. The song was catchy as hell and about the legendary Captain, and for God's sake watch the music video. It's so light-hearted and fun and wholesome and in great humor. This opened the door for Albano to meet many musicians, and his name recognition came in handy when he met Cyndi Lauper on a flight from Puerto Rico. They developed a friendship, and Cindy's manager suggested that the two collaborate on a project in the future. In 1984, Cyndi needed someone to play her father in the music video for Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. No one was more suited to this role than her real-life friend Captain Lou, and as of right now, the video has nearly 1.5 billion views on YouTube, making it perhaps Captain Lou's most famous appearance in global popular culture. It's quite funny because Lou initially was reluctant to do the video but was convinced by his wife. He would go on to star in multiple of her music videos, and eventually, Cyndi would appear on Roddy Piper's Piper's Pit to discuss the collaboration. This was huge for wrestling, but particularly for the ever-expanding WWF, which was now under the helmsmanship of Vince McMahon Jr. During the Piper's Pit program, Albano was on form. Cyndi revealed that Lou was not, in fact, her manager as many in the audience had thought, so out of nowhere, Lou shows up and claims he found Cyndi when she was nothing, and made her a superstar. He claimed to have written the words for Time After Time, which again was flipping hilarious. He would then claim that women belong in a kitchen and pregnant, and ask Cyndi Lauper to agree with that statement. I can't even cope when I watch this back. It's so funny. I mean, he literally referred to her as a barroom broad. It's so funny. And good on Cyndi Lauper for getting involved and smacking Lou and Roddy about a bit. This is a classic example of how funny Lou was, and if you watch more of his promos, you'll see how he was consistently on form. Cyndi Lauper at the time had the #1 song in the country and was at the height of her popularity. This led to them having a competition by proxy in which they would choose a female wrestler to fight on their behalf, with Lauper choosing Wendy Richter and Albano choosing the fabulous Moolah. Moolah gets a mention in my Mae Young video, but I'm still not sure exactly how to cover Fabulous Moolah's history. I'm sure if you ask in the comments or do a quick Google search, you'll be enlightened as to why. Behind the scenes, however, despite his on-screen persona, Albano had become involved in several charities due to a death in the family from multiple sclerosis. Albano would raise funds to help fight the disease, often alongside Cyndi Lauper. In this era, kayfabe was more protected, and it wasn't exactly congruent with his charitable nature that he was presented as a heel on television. So in 1984, after 32 years of winding people up, Lou Albano turned babyface again. He arranged for Lauper to receive an in-ring award for her contributions to both wrestling and the fight against MS. During the presentation of the award, Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton came down and broke the award over Albano's head until Hulk Hogan came rushing down to protect Albano, a sign to the world that he had fully turned babyface. Through the early 90s, Albano would take a break from the WWF and would briefly work for Herb Abrams' UWF promotion, not to be confused with the Mid-South UWF, before returning to the WWF in 1994 for his last run to manage the Head Shrinkers before leaving in 1995 and retiring fully from managing wrestlers in 1996. This involvement of Lauper and the events leading up to Albano's face turn were of paramount importance to the growth of the WWF. Before this, celebrity inclusion in professional wrestling was scarce, basically unheard of, and Albano had broken down barriers in the world of entertainment that remained open doors for generations to come, as we see consistently celebrity guests make appearances for the WWE ever since. It was all of this that led MTV to broadcast The Brawl to End It All, which introduced the WWF to the young adult market and resulted in a boom period for the promotion that allowed it to stand out as the #1 brand in sports entertainment. Dodgy Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer wrote that without Albano, wrestling history would have been monumentally different. This was due to the fact that if Lauper hadn't been involved, the early losses that the WWF were making on expanding nationally and buying so much television could have put the company under. I'll have to cover this more in my video I'll make about the first WrestleMania because it's a bit of a long tangent to go on here. Albano would also appear in the 1986 film Wise Guys and played the role of Mario in the live-action and animated segments of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, as well as appearing in 227, Hey Dude, Miami Vice, Stay Tuned, and as a recurring guest on the game show Hollywood Squares. He would play a fictionalized version of himself in the movie Body Slam. With most of these television and film appearances taking place during his brief break from the WWF in the early 90s. And that's basically his career in a nutshell. Outside of wrestling, Albano married his high school sweetheart, a lady named Geraldine Tango. It was a marriage that lasted 56 years until his death, and Albano was noted by his colleagues and contemporaries for how faithful he was to his wife. Considering the nature of the business at the time and even now, that's saying something. There's a lot of ladies who would throw themselves at wrestlers, and in that old school crowd, not so great behavior will have been slightly encouraged by some of his colleagues. The fact that Lou Albano was so faithful to his lady and such a charitable man is a far cry from the belligerent, selfish misogynist he would depict himself as on television. Albano's siblings would all become teachers, and Lou was often brought in to entertain George Albano's students during their lunch hour. Lou would again be immortalized in song by Kimya Dawson, who would feature Bryan Danielson on her track about Captain Lou. I like the sentiment, but I don't like the track, I have to say. Melodically, it's rather thin, but that's one for when I start actually uploading to a Music Mark channel. After multiple health scares and his first heart attack, which he had survived in 2005, Lou Albano would pass away from his second heart attack on October 14, 2009, in his hometown of Westchester County, New York. He was 76 years old and was buried at Rose Hill Memorial Park in Carmel, New York. Lou Albano, by all accounts, was a good man, a talented orator, a charismatic individual with a great sense of humor, and an integral and often underrated part of the story of professional wrestling becoming a global phenomenon, and is dearly missed by those who knew him, grew up watching him, and those who have learned about his legacy afterwards. What a great guy, often imitated, never duplicated. Rest in peace to the good captain, Captain Lou Albano. Thank you for watching another Sarcastic Mark upload. If you enjoyed this one, and you are a fan of wrestling history in general, I'd love for you to subscribe and join my small but ever-growing community of Sarcastic Marks. See you in the next one.